Hello and welcome to the only podcast where we may be boring and yet we keep getting in trouble. I'm Matt.
I'm Luke.
I'm Max.
And I'm Sway, again.
And this is Force for Thought.
So I did rewatch Rogue One just today, but is that a Rogue One quote?
It is a Rogue One quote, yes. I had a couple.
When is it?
listed
I can't
out.
place it.
It's K2SO when he says it's rather boring and yet they keep getting into trouble when they first go to Jeddah.
Yeah.
Before the war breaks out. I thought it was funny. I have not been hitting the jokes well, Sway.
I liked it.
No, that was
Yeah,
good.
the
All
lack
right.
of laughs.
Too.
Also, welcome back, Sway. Thanks so much for. It's been almost a
Hi,
full
Sway.
year since you've been on
Hi.
the podcast, and also you're the only guest we've ever had.
Whoa. Okay, that's an honor.
Yeah, I kind of want to keep it like that. To be honest, I think it'd be funny. I mean,
Well, yeah, and
We-
it's important because Sway brings an important perspective to the table. Because last time we talked to Sway, for those of you who don't know, we were doing our review of Andor. Because at the time, the only Star Wars content that Sway had seen was Mandalorian and Andor, I believe, right?
Yes.
So now you've seen Rogue One. Have you seen any other Star Wars content?
No. And I'm happy to keep it that way. Just like every time I see something
Oh.
new that's Star Wars related, we talk about it.
yes.
Mm.
So in a
Oh,
good,
to
in a
do
good
reviews,
way.
to do
Yes.
reviews.
Yes. To do
That
reviews,
is so interesting. Okay, well, I'm
That is
going to
an-
kick it
that
back
is
to
an
Matt, but I
incredible
have
sacrifice you're making for our podcast.
Yes. Oh, I mean,
it's
I will-
appreciated.
I will say, after I finished Rogue One, it dawned on me that there was so much else to see. Because obviously the ending of Rogue One is so open-ended that I realized this was not a great system.
yes, correct. Starting with Andor is an interesting aspect, I guess. Well, it started with Mandalorian, but
Yeah.
it's oh man. Well, I'm so glad that you watched Rogue One. We were supposed to do this episode a while ago, and you were going to see it Rogue One in the Academy Museum.
Yes.
And then that ended up being canceled, and we ended up not doing that episode a couple months ago. But it worked out because now we're here talking about it. And yeah, so we all rewatched Rogue One, which is the first time I've watched Rogue One since I watched Andor.
Me too.
Yeah.
It definitely changed my perspective on a lot of things because I was taking notes like I do when I'm rewatching anything for these reviews for the pod. But a lot of my notes center around season 1 and what I think season 2 of Andor might be.
Interesting. All right. So welcome to the Rogue One review / Andor season 2 theories.
I mean, just smaller things like I wonder if we'll get to see Andor go to sniper school because he's apparently a capable sniper. I wonder if that'll be something in season 2.
Something I did realize in this watch of Rogue One was when Andor is like, when they're locked up with Saw Gerrera, and he's like, I've never been locked in a cage whatever, and Chirrut is like, oh, you can be,
Yes.
and I was like, oh, so he doesn't ever get captured in Andor season 2 then? Like,
Yes, that one stuck out to me
Right?
like a sore thumb on the rewatch too, because I thought the exact same thing. Sure, it says I've been trapped in worse cages than this or whatever,
Yes,
and I was
yeah.
like, oh, so is Andor. And then his literal line was, "This is a first for me," and I'm like, wait, what the fuck?
He doesn't like to talk about it. It was traumatic.
But also that he was under a pseudonym at the time, so I was like, well, maybe on a technicality, Cassian Andor has never been imprisoned. Who knows?
That's true. It's a lot of technicalities.
Luke doesn't like that theory.
I don't like that theory. No.
That's true. They even while writing Andor, they were like, "We're gonna have a middle section where he's just in prison for the 3 episodes," and then I feel like Tony Gilroy was like, "Yeah, let's do that," and then I feel like they're like, "Well, he did say he was never in prison, ever or in a cage."
If they cared about that, I mean, we knew so little about Andor from just Rogue One. They definitely could have filled a TV show of all stuff that is not even mentioned about his character.
Yeah.
I mean, he has trauma, PTSD, or he just. No, the pseudonym thing is stupid.
Yeah,
He has no
it
reason
is.
to do that.
To go back to the beginning a little bit, I feel like
Yes, my first note is actually the opening shot.
okay. Well, hang on. Yes, I do. Yes, there's so much to get into, but I want to start with Sway's perspective as well to seeing it. But also, if anybody has not listened to our Andor, I'm just going to assume you haven't listened to our Andor season 1 review. Sway's one of the coolest people I know, and so she
was a
is
while
on
ago,
here
even
as
if they
our-
had,
Yes,
yeah.
that's true. And she's the resident Force for Thought person who does not know about Star Wars, but is also maybe the smartest person I also know. So Sway, you saw Rogue One for the first time. What was your what do you think? What was your overarching thoughts? Please tell us. This is your first ever Star Wars movie, so because you just had experience with the show, so please tell us what you thought about the intro, the ending, the credits. What did you feel throughout?
I also want to caveat something you said, which is that a lot of your listeners will not think I am the coolest or smartest person that you know if this is my second Star Wars thing that I've watched, which
You
is
know,
fair.
that might be true, just because a lot of incels and stuff. But
She's
but
doing it as a
but actually-
sacrifice to the pod. She's a
No, most
martyr.
people are allowed
Martyr.
to have that opinion. So I just want to say for the listeners, that's a reasonable opinion. As far as what my initial thoughts were, it made me think back to us doing our Andor episode because what I realized is while I was watching Rogue One, my first thought was, what a harsh and cruel world and rebel crew this is.
Mhm.
And I realized that I had more of a kind of cuddly, quote unquote, experience of Andor,
Yeah.
as cuddly as Andor can be from watching Andor. And it must have been such a trip to see Andor after Rogue One and kind of the person that he was from the start.
Yeah.
I even noted, is Andor bad? Question mark, question mark, question mark. And then I also said, Andor being a rules guy, also 3 question marks, because he says, I have orders that I have disobeyed. But it just made me think that I had a totally different perspective on Cassian Andor himself because of having started with Andor versus Rogue One. So that really stood out for me, and I was so curious about how both all 3 of your experiences have been, having seen Rogue One first.
I remember when Rogue One came out, people were talking about that line when Cassian says, "We've all done horrible things in the name of this rebellion, and we want it to mean something."
Mhm.
And people were saying that, like, I remember one person in particular was saying, like, "Well, he just killed one guy. It's like he didn't do anything that bad." And I was like, it was like a friend though that he shot in the back. Like that was bad. I was very satisfied with Cassian's entire character arc from just Rogue One, and I mean, I love, you know how much I love Andor, but I still think we didn't need it to learn all this extra detail about the things Cassian has done in the name of the rebellion.
Mhm.
Because yeah, that opening scene with him on the Ring of Kafrene is just so perfect. It establishes the character and the stakes and who he is.
For me, when watching Rogue One, Andor is like the worst character in it. He's my least favorite character. Again, big Bodhi fan. And I think when also Sway, we talked about this a while ago, Max, Luke, and I, was that I might like Bodhi so much because he is technically one of the first like glasses wearers. He has goggles on top of his head, and I've never really seen that before. So he never puts them down really, but it's still like I think it still counts. I think they're prescription. But I think but so when Andor came out,
It's like those glasses you need just when you drive. Oh no, we do see him fly, but never mind. All right, cut that. Yeah, it's definitely not that.
But yeah, I like I like Andor significantly more with the show, and then rewatching Rogue One, I was like, oh yeah, Andor actually rules now. And for
Mhm.
some reason at the time, I was like a bigger fan of the other characters. And I think it is because he might be that muddied gray area where he is kind of good and bad, right? He is a rule follower and yet a rule breaker. He is a complex person.
I think a lot of it is that Cassian in Rogue One is right in that middle ground where he doesn't get nearly as much development as Jin, but he gets a lot more than every other member
Yes.
of the crew. And so it's like you don't like him just for kind of being there and looking cool, like Chirrut Baze and Bodhi, but you don't like him for, his character as much as Jin. So it's just kind of an awkward middle ground that you find him in.
Maxwell?
I just keep thinking about the depiction of the rebellion as cuddly from Andor because I'm trying to think of it and I'm like, well, really, we haven't even seen the rebellion yet. So this is like in Andor, the rebellion is just kind of getting its feet off the ground, so to speak. And so that is an interesting perspective that this is like the first time that you're actually seeing the rebellion, and
That's true.
that's an
Yeah.
interesting perspective.
Yeah, your only perspective is that Mon Mothma like didn't even want to do the heist on Aldhani, and now
Mm-hmm.
she's like a war council
Mon
leader.
I feel like Mon Mothma was also great in this movie. Not to detract too much, Sway, because I want you to go through your list and stuff too. But Mon Mothma's great in this, and it's so weird because she is in A New Hope as well, and I feel like they
Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi. Thank you. Sorry, and I feel like they cast her purely just how her neck looks, because I feel like she has such a long neck. And then in Andor, she is so different looking even, and I feel like she even talks differently. I feel like she makes her Mon Mothma herself as a bit of a different character, and then I feel like in Rogue One she feels like very akin to Return of the Jedi. Anyway, Sway, do you have any what do you have any other notes or anything off the top of your head? It could be more discussional too, but I'm so interested just in seeing how, again, first Star Wars movie.
Sorry,
No, I had
before
to-
you get into it, Sway, I
Yeah,
want to comment
yeah,
on what
for-
you just said because I never really thought about that. But that's so true. In Rogue One, it feels like she's doing an impersonation of Return of the Jedi Mon Mothma, and in Rogue One or in Andor, she really gets to make it her own.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was a good insight.
Thank
So
you.
because you watched this from Andor to Rogue One, do you have any thoughts on Mon Mothma? Were you surprised when you saw her there, or were you like, oh yeah, she was in Andor, of course she would be here?
With a different haircut now.
No, I wasn't. I guess I didn't register it as surprise because my whole expectation was that because they're sequential, because I watch them sequentially,
Mm-hmm.
and my experience was as a sequential watch, it just all made sense where everybody kind of was in the story. So I didn't have that experience of surprise in a way that may have been more present if I had watched Rogue One before Andor.
So
Yeah.
I feel bad pointing this out if you haven't made this connection already, but were you surprised by the lack of anyone in Rogue One, notably Luthen Rael? Because he's a pretty main character in Andor.
Oh,
I
you
think
know
it's
what?
Rael?
Yeah,
Luthen
That-
Rael?
Luthen Rail.
it bothered me the whole
No.
time during our Andor review, and I never said it. I can't go through it again. If we're gonna be talking about him,
You waited like a full year to bring this up now?
This is Harry Henry Winkler all over again.
Yes.
Yeah, what
So
do you
that
what do you think of Luthen? The
That
absence
wasn't a
of.
s- That wasn't a surprise for me and is now getting me thinking about season 2.
Yes. I know. It's like, what is he gonna? He's gonna get got, presumably, or
he's
Yeah.
gonna retire.
yeah, that's what's going. He's gonna,
Yeah, he's got a farm.
Hang it up.
as the rebellion kicks off, he's like, "Yeah, I think I did my part," and walks away.
I'm more of an idea guy. Now that this thing's getting some real legs, I'm just gonna bow out.
Oh,
My
no,
my
this-
shop does need some maintaining.
Your shop. Oh. Anyway,
my
Sway,
God.
please get into it for what you were going to talk about.
Well, one thing I was thinking about a lot is because again, this is the first um, Star Wars film that I've seen,
Mhm.
is the impact of, and this is pretty obvious, but that Star Wars has had on sci-fi in general
Mhm.
and sci-fi films. And there were a couple of things like when I saw K2, I was like, oh, this is TARS from Interstellar.
Mm.
And then also the Rebel fighter cockpit scenes, I was like, oh, I actually thought, oh, this is Dunkirk. And then I was like, Christopher Nolan really loves Star Wars, which he does. But there were just so many. I'm such a huge sci-fi watcher, as I mentioned on the Andor episode, and somehow Star Wars just never made it into my watches of sci-fi. And I could just see where it had an impact on every sci-fi film that was made after Star Wars came out
The
in a
Dunkirk,
way that was fascinating.
yeah, the Dunkirk thing is an interesting point because you said it does feel the cockpit seems to feel a lot like World War II, and that's exactly what George Lucas was going for when in the original cut of A New Hope he has the stock World War II footage for a lot of
Oh, that's amazing.
the fighter footage scenes while in the rough cut and stuff too. So it makes a lot of sense. I feel like that's the exact style he was going for back when he was doing A New Hope.
As
I
some-
also love the cockpit scenes. I just feel like if you were an actor, what an incredible job to put on the costume and then sit in the cockpit and say like a few lines, and then you go home and you're in a Star Wars movie. Like, pretty amazing.
Yes, that has to be actually the best job because it's probably pretty quick and you're just in and out.
yeah, except for Anton Marioc. What's his name exactly?
Anton Merrick?
It's something very. It's Blue Leader.
Yeah.
He gets a lot of standing lines too. But as someone who hasn't seen A New Hope or any other Star Wars movie for that matter, but A New Hope, did you think anything different of like Blue Leader versus Red Leader versus Gold Leader? Did you notice that Red Leader and Gold Leader was recovered footage from the 70s and those are the same actors in A New Hope?
No, and that really stood out for me too. Even in just thinking about Andor versus Rogue One, the footage when it was shot, the characters and how we're kind of jumping decades as far as their storylines, and they're not really making people look older or younger from what I could tell. There was something about the footage and also the way that the characters were treated, where time just became sort of nebulous,
Mhm.
and I couldn't really get a sense of when things were made, or it didn't feel weird that we're talking about characters jumping decades in the past or the future and the way that they look. There was kind of a timelessness to everything that didn't make that feel like it was kind of spliced in.
Yeah, like Galen Urso even feels like in the beginning versus
Yes.
towards the end. It does. It feels like Rogue One does a really good job of setting the world for somehow and just like naturally. And then I think you had a great point, and it's something that I really loved, especially rewatching Rogue One. Rogue One, we've talked about this now a little bit, but is my third favorite Star Wars movie. But every time I watch it, I'm like, is this actually maybe my favorite Star Wars movie? Like, I love Rogue One so much, and I think part of it is because the way it looks, like you said, Sway, is like it feels very much like A New Hope to me. Like the background, all the planets, it feels very much like, oh, what if we made A New Hope but in like 2016 versus back in 1977. So to me, it's like, oh, it's got like this crispness, but it also everything feels like it has a little bit of grime on it, and it feels like it's got a little bit of film grain into it, which I also love. And like you said, when it's jumping between time periods, because that's something too that when you started watching this, you're like, oh, the little girl is Jyn Erso, but like not having seen a trailer presumably or anything, it probably is harder to catch on to that too. I guess it's like probably like, oh, this is this character we're following. I don't know.
Yeah, I did feel like everyone felt kind of ageless in a way that I thought really worked for the film. And I think it also made the film feel like it moved more quickly because you weren't so fixated on, okay, now we're X amount of years into the future.
Yeah, the movie does hustle. It goes from scene to scene pretty quickly, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. What I was getting at with Red Leader and Gold Leader on this particular rewatch, and it's been happening more and more since we started doing this podcast, and it has not made me like Star Wars any less, because I know some people say this when they, not that this is my job anymore, but when you start like working on your hobby and turning it into work, it becomes less fun, which is not what's happening. I want to be clear. I still
Yes,
love
yeah.
Star Wars, but I am analyzing everything under a microscope a lot more than I typically would. And so, like, I know all these behind the scenes things, and I know that the development of Rogue One was troubled, and there were rewrites and reshoots. I mean, you can see that from the trailers alone. There's a ton of trailer shots that are never in the final movie. So, things like Red Leader and Gold Leader being in it, and like, I know that they were so constrained by the random pieces of footage that they had to make it
Mhm.
work. And when I see it, I'm like, does that make sense? Like, it was the same thing with Leia in Episode 9. That, like, because you have to look at it more clearly.
Mhm.
Another example was, shoot, I'm losing my train of thought now, and I didn't have this written down. I have another example that I'll come back to in a little bit.
Perfect.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the Red Leader and Gold Leader thing. Like, does
Mhm.
that stand out to you? Oh, like Tarkin and Leia. Like, could you tell when you were watching Sway that those two characters were CG? That they were like,
Yeah, I could. I I won't it didn't bother me in watching it. I think because all of it felt so new, but I
mhm,
can totally understand, and all of it felt a little bit period, like you were saying, Matt.
Mhm.
Like there's kind of a film quality to it that I just kind of leaned into the CG. And so many of the set pieces where the CG is really good, like the ship at the end that's a drill. Like that's such a beautiful shot that it kind of makes you forgive some of the later shots that are CG.
I'm having a
But I
hard time
could
remembering
definitely
the
tell.
drill. What are you talking about?
It's like a ship that's
Oh, the Hammerhead
that
Corvette.
pushes, yeah, the hammerhead. Yes.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that is a sick
Like
scene.
yeah.
It-
That scene I was like, I wish I saw it at the Academy Theater. I did watch it on a 4K projector, but I was like, I can imagine seeing this in the theater when it came out and just
yeah.
losing my mind.
Does Draven die in that scene? Because he's the captain on the Hammerhead Corvette, and he's like a big deal in this movie. But well, I'm not going to worry about spoiling the rest of Star Wars. He's not in the rest of the movies, but General Draven.
Mhm.
I was wondering if we were going to get. I was looking for it more in this rewatch. If
I don't
he's
know.
going to die,
I feel like he's
does that ship blow up?
I don't know, but I
I
I
feel
know
think it
those,
does. It
those
just-
Star Destroyers blow up.
Yeah, it just
but-
pushes them into each other.
Right.
that specific character I feel like is a weird antagonist within the rebellion. Like he is the guy you kind of root against for some reason, but because he gives Andor the go ahead to kill Galen Urso.
No one
What?
wants to see how the sausage gets made, man.
Oh my
That's
God.
the kind of moves that win wars. No one wants to know it, but
I never made the connection that was the same guy.
it is. Yeah, General Draven.
That's
And I
interesting,
had it
yeah.
on my note. I think he should definitely be in season 2. He and
would
Cassian
be
have
cool.
a history.
That's
It
true.
definitely did seem like it. I'm realizing now that I actually don't have any notes about Rogue One. I just have 100 questions for Sway.
Oh, so do I. Yeah,
so
that's
before,
exactly.
before we
I had
leave
no-
Tarkin, because Tarkin isn't like
I
an
need to talk-
iconic character. Like I'm assuming, Sway, that when you saw Darth Vader for the first time, you were like, yeah, I obviously know this Darth Vader. Presumably the same thing with Princess Leia. Tarkin isn't nearly as popular of a character as those two. So when you saw this guy and you obviously saw that he was CG, what were you thinking? Were you like, oh, this must be somebody who's in one of the other movies?
Yes. Yeah, that was my thinking. Also, I think because by the time I got to the end and you see Princess Leia and that CG, I was like, okay, I guess this is one of those times where they do have to make this a CG character.
Mhm.
And also, I will say because I think overall I'm just more forgiving and like early CG in movies, so it just didn't really bump for me. I didn't really think about that character as like they were shoehorning it in. It felt natural to the story, so
Yeah.
I guess it didn't bump for me that much.
This also, to me, this movie weirdly sets the precedence of using CG characters in general, because it feels like this is one of the first movies I've ever seen. I think it was a huge deal when they did this to Peter Cushing and then also obviously Carrie Fisher. Because after that, then I feel like obviously with the strikes, happening, everything, it was like protecting actors, kind of like rights and stuff. But this is like the first movie that I think they really did that with. Like
Mhm.
besides that movie with when they replaced Kevin Spacey with Christopher Plummer, but besides that, I feel like this is like one of the first movies they did that with.
Not only did they do that, but they kept it a complete secret. Like Tarkin was not in any of the
No.
trailers. I was blown away in
Yeah.
theaters when I saw.
I thought we were just gonna get
I
the
mean,
reflection of him.
how
I
long
did
has
too,
Peter
and I was so
Cushing been
happy
dead?
with it because
Yeah.
I remember in theaters leaning forward, like, oh my gosh, I can see his face
Yeah.
in the reflection. That's so cool.
And then he turns around fully and is in the rest of the movie, basically.
yeah, and you're like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
But it does make
Wait, so
sense.
what is all of your relationship with Tarkin? Like, was that a moment in the theater where you feel very surprised?
Yes.
Yeah, I was blown away. I
We
couldn't
all three
believe
of
it.
us saw it together as well, and so yeah, we definitely were all
Oh, that's cool.
blown away by it. And I think this is one of those things where, for I think the best way to describe Tarkin, especially in A New Hope, is just like he's like the worst old stuffy English teacher in high school.
You got the toy right behind you. Show it to the camera.
Yeah, give him a grab. Go for it.
All right. Well,
Max clearly loves Tarkin. He's one of
Here's-
the 7 or
here's-
8 toys we got in the studio.
Camera over there, Sway over there. There's Tarkin. I'll put him right here next to me.
As
He's-
far as
he's a-
toys go, thumbs down.
It's a pretty good face mold, though. All
Yeah.
things
It-
considered.
yes,
Not the most
I'm sorry.
interesting-
Technically, it is a well-made toy, but in
he
terms
has
of
very
fun,
defined
very fun.
cheekbones, though, so I feel like
Yes.
he's an easy actor to make a toy out
True.
of.
He's also Van Helsing in all. He's the the antithesis
Nobody cares.
of
Matthew.
Christopher Lee and Dracula. It's him and Dooku. That's interesting. That's Star Wars lore.
Dooku.
Okay, yeah, yes. So I've been trying to get off topic of Star Wars a couple times here and there, and they do not like it.
This reminds me though, one of the things I was thinking about, because do you remember when I was telling you that when you were like, oh, watch the final, there's like a post-credit
Yes.
scene. Was it in Mando? Yeah, and I was like,
It was an Andor.
okay,
yeah.
what is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was the Death Star and
Being
he was
built?
like, it's the Death Star being
Yeah.
built.
It's like that's what they were doing in prison.
And I had like no connection to
you
what
That is
that was.
crazy.
Yeah, because you texted me, and you're like, "What is it?" I was like, "No."
So now you've seen the Death Star in use. Does that add another layer that Andor was unknowingly making the weapon of his own demise?
Yes, it added a huge layer, and it made me think about Rogue One, and what about Rogue One feels classic Star Wars, like because even you're talking about like thinking about Tarkin and that scene being such a surprise for audiences. When I was watching the film, it made me think, is there classic Star Wars in here that I'm missing? Are there surprises in here that I'm missing? In the same way that seeing the Death Star being made just kind of went over my head.
Matt will be able to speak to that better than I can in terms of like the filmmaking of Star Wars and like the style and the aesthetic. But there are a couple of things that, as a big Star Wars fan, they just included to make it look like Star Wars. Like in the beginning, when Krennic comes to get Galen and his family, and it cuts to like their little homestead, and it lingers on that shot of their blue milk
Yes, it does.
for like 1.5 seconds. Like, oh, blue milk, which isn't even that big of a thing in classic Star. They drink it in A New Hope. But then those two characters that they run into on Jeddah, and
Yes.
it like
yeah.
is very careful to show their faces, and she just bumps into the guy and he says, "Watch it." But those two characters are also in A New Hope, and the Bail Organa, the guy that just walks into the War Council meeting and the camera pans over to him like it's God
And
himself.
the
Yes!
music swells, and the twin sun starts
Yeah.
playing.
That is
Yeah.
such a 2016
'Cause
Star Wars thing. You
it's-
wouldn't even do that today.
No, because it's just Jimmy Schmitz. Like he doesn't, he's just an actor. Like at the
Yeah.
time, he's like, oh, that's the guy from Sons of Anarchy. Like if you don't know anything else, and The West Wing, Jimmy Schmitz
And
is a really good actor.
even in Star Wars, it's just Bail Organa. Like,
Yep.
I do remember thinking that felt like such a dramatic scene, but I
Yep.
guess it's kind of the reveal was part of it. Yeah.
No,
but even as a
rewatching
Star
it-
Wars fan, the reveal is a little heavy-handed.
Yes, because he's not a huge. I mean, he's a fine character in the prequels, but
He is a fine character. That's a good way to describe him.
when I
No complaints.
yes, when I rewatched Rogue One as well, when that came up, I was like, is there a whole storyline I'm forgetting about with Bail Organa on here? It's like, oh no, he just wanted to show him.
That's what I wanted to talk about also with the, looking at it under a microscope, because I know that there were rewrites and stuff, and so many parts like that, like maybe Bail Organa did have a bigger role in other parts, or especially the relationship with Jin and Cassian, because you know that there was a script, an edit of the script that had them as a love interest, and when they get together on the beach and you think they're going to kiss and then they don't, and then they just hug and then they die, it's like, were they supposed to kiss in another version of this and then they just didn't redo it? Like that part started seeming off to me.
I don't.
You
know.
don't agree?
I don't think there was a love interest between the two.
I think it was perfect the way it was, so I don't think that, but I know what you mean about how obviously there was like a lot of rewrites and edits and stuff like that. I think, you see, we've had this argument before about some Bad Batch characters, but I would consider Cassian and Jin to have been a love interest, even though they never kissed.
Yeah, I agree.
Sway's on my side for this one.
I feel like I started this train, but I don't consider them a love interest in the movie that we got, but I think there's definitely enough hints of what would have been a love interest in just like the structure of their stories and the way they interact. Like the one scene when, Cassian says, we're saboteurs, murderers, and we all want to go to Scarif and fight with you.
Mhm.
And then she like looks at him and like brushes her shoulder against his and is like, I'm not used to people sticking around. It's like, are we flirting now?
It's a lot funnier thinking of that scene in that context, to be honest. I like that quite a bit. Something that not the filmmaking aspect, but something I love about Star Wars and this movie specifically, and that's why I want to see what your thoughts are, is I think it's also really funny. Obviously, like
Yes.
K2SO
Yeah.
is hilarious. He's one of my favorite characters in Star Wars, by
Yes.
far my favorite droid. But like to me, there's also moments of situations and characters. Star Wars obviously doesn't have even the option to make real world references, but I feel like some movies or sci-fi do, or they're just like, oh, I wonder, like that'll never be invented, like for something that like we clearly have technology wise or something, but they just rely on humor and the fact of the characters are funny and the situations those characters are in can be funny. So when Sharuk gets the bag on his head and he says, really, I'm already blind, like that's
Yes.
really funny.
Mhm.
Like that, those lines like that. And I mean, K2SO is like, do you want to know the probability of
Almost every K2SO
yes,
line.
it's so
Yes.
it hits all the time to me, and it's such a sad thing because the movie is so funny, but then it ends so sad as well. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another one of my notes. That the tone, it's like a Star Wars 2.0 where they just took A New Hope and just every thing that didn't land exactly, they just made better. Like C-3PO, I've talked before, I don't really like C-3PO.
I do.
K2SO is a strict improvement upon him
True.
in every way. It's like
Yes.
they tried to do the exact same thing and K2SO was a success where C3PO was a failure. The oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought again. All right, never mind. Go on.
Sway, what did you think though of like the humor, and also just like I would kind of not to, I guess two questions. There's humor, and then two, I guess, is Star Wars movies usually start with an opening crawl, as I'm sure like you've seen and stuff in the past. And so, was it a shock for you not to have that opening crawl, and just as a a galaxy?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Were you expecting an opening crawl?
No, I was expecting an opening crawl, and I have to say I was a little disappointed.
Yeah, there was.
I just felt like
yeah.
that's part of the watching a Star Wars movie experience that I know of from not having seen any,
Yeah.
and I was a little disappointed that it wasn't on there.
It's a weird thing because at the time they were trying to figure out what to do with like because Rogue One and Solo were the only two non like Skywalker saga movies, and they were like it was a huge debate what was going to happen, and they both handled them differently. But now rewatching it like almost a decade later, I'm like I kind of do wish it had a crawl as well.
I probably do wish I had a crawl also, just because, yeah, we've said that before. Back when they were planning 15 Star Wars story movies, you couldn't do a crawl. You shouldn't do a crawl for all of
Yeah.
them. But since there's only two, you could have done a crawl for both of them. I like what they did with the opening shot, that hard entrance with the sound, but I don't
Yes.
like the opening shot. It just
Really?
doesn't sit right with me. The ring around that planet, it just doesn't look right. The way the shadows are like, because it's intentionally trying to make you think you're looking at something different when it first starts. It's like, what am I looking at? And then as it zooms out, you're like, oh, it's rings around a planet. But like the ship that's traveling is in the shadowy part, so should we be able to see it? And I know that that's a really in the weeds question for a sci-fi show, but they're taking the effort to try to trick us with the lighting and the imagery, and I don't know. I don't like it.
I hold the exact opposite view, where I have no problem with that shot, but I just don't like how it comes in, just with that sudden, like, I don't know, like it sounds like someone just kind of slams their hand down on a piano, because that was such a big deal in 2016. How are they going to open it? How are they going to open it? It seems like that was just like a very like, nope, we're just going to throw them in there. And it's like, okay, well, you still could have opened it like a normal movie. Like, I don't know. It feels like they went
No, because
out
they
of their
couldn't have
way.
opened it like a normal movie. They
Yes,
had to
they
go out of their way to
can.
do something different.
Every single movie that's ever been made has had to have the conversation of how does this start? What's the first shot? What do you look
No,
at?
Star Wars has to open in a
How
more
do you go?
specific
How do you
way
go
than
from
that.
the Lucasfilm title card to the first shot? They certainly could have done something. This one was just like, we're just gonna throw them in there. We're gonna make a big point about how we're not doing the crawl. I don't know.
Mhm.
That's my
That's crazy.
take.
What do you think about it?
I mean the intro to me is fine. I think I like that it pans up a little bit. I mean, that's the classic Star Warsy intro. So I don't know. I think it gives and takes, and I'd rather have a bit of a crawl, I think, in general. Sway, would you rather have opened the movie differently with the crawl or anything else?
Yeah, but I will say that's just because I was like, I'm looking for the Star Wars experience.
Yes.
And not opening it with the crawl was kind of a letdown.
But now you get to come back to it. You gotta
Yeah,
get
but I
another
will
movie.
say, if I had seen a bunch of Star Wars movies and they were all the crawl, I might have been excited. Did a cat just walk into the room?
Yes.
Oh,
That is
okay,
my
great.
cat, yes.
Okay, great. But if I had seen a bunch of Star Wars movies with the crawl, I may have been more excited to see that it was a
Yeah.
different opening.
How about
I did want to
yeah,
say
please.
the humor.
Mm.
I think that when I talk about a cuddly Andor, part of the experience that I had was I've only seen The Mandalorian and Andor. Andor, I would say, is very earnest, and The Mandalorian, I would say, is very sweet. And I think that the very sharp humor, which I love, like I totally agree with you guys. I think all of the humor around the Force was really funny
Mhm.
in a way that I wasn't expecting. And until the very end where it becomes earnest, and all of the humor around K2 is very funny until the moment at the end where he becomes very earnest.
Yeah.
And I loved all of that. I thought it really worked for me in like getting invested in the characters
Certainly.
before something bad happens to them.
Yes.
And the ending I found so devastating, and part of it was because we had so many laughs along the way.
Yes. Yeah, because it almost feels like a buddy movie until it's very serious. It kind of catches you off guard a little bit. But speaking of characters too, like, did you have a favorite character? Were you drawn to anybody?
It was
Specifically-
K2 for sure.
Yeah, K2 is the best. K2 and I also really love Jin. I think she's great. But,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, everybody. I think even Baze was interesting. You know, he's got his big machine gun. They each have a distinguishable thing about them, which is so fun too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when you're a kid, if you're playing together, if you're like 8 years old, you're like, I'm that character, I'm this character. And I think it's got that aspect to it as well that I still feel like it's so fun. What?
Bless your heart, Matt, because I guarantee if we were kids playing Rogue One, no one would want to be Bodhi.
No, that's
No
the
one
thing.
but
I
you.
would. See,
I know you would.
that's the thing. I always tell Max this. It's like it's good to have different opinions because if you're in a group, you can't be you can't be a group of 3 snipers.
Right, yeah. Someone's got to want the hump in a car seat. in
Okay,
a car.
okay, all right. Yeah, you know who does? Our friend Josh.
That's true.
He always
Helps
knows
round
middle.
us
Sit.
out.
He
It's
is-
honest work.
Yeah, he calls middle every
I-
single time.
I do want to echo though, I love Jen.
Yeah.
And I loved having this protagonist who is so scrappy
Mhm.
and not not a warrior and not someone who at the start has this like magnificent presence
Yeah,
but commands a room as she is. I thought that was such an interesting protagonist, and I loved her as a character.
yeah. It's really heartbreaking because you see her get ripped away from her home in the beginning, and then she clearly had an implied rough childhood, being raised by a paranoid Saw Gerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker, who has the best voice maybe in all of Star Wars. And every single time we do this podcast, I want to impersonate him, but like I can't do it when I'm sitting, and because I do it at home all the time. I always say "Save the Rebellion, Save the Dream," or something to that effect.
It's because you got to get punched in the gut before you do it.
Yeah, he just is. It's very whispery.
I remember before it came out, I was talking to our other brother, and I said, I don't know about this Forrest Whitaker character, and he seems very Forrest Whitaker-y. And I think to date, now 8 years back, I think this is the most Forrest Whitaker-y Forrest Whitaker has ever been, right?
It's very Forrest
Yes.
Whitaker.
Yeah.
They told him to turn it up.
Yeah.
But I remember that being one thing because when coming out of this movie, it was like almost unanimously loved. People really enjoyed Rogue One. But Saw Gerrera was a very common complaint that a lot of people had. They were like, yeah, that guy was a little weird. And I had the exact opposite. Saw Gerrera is still probably one of my favorite parts. It was
Yeah.
so interesting to see this character and like a different side of the rebellion.
Yes.
That like we're describing the rebellion as being pretty dark, but then like Saw is like an offshoot of that that's even darker and like even more
Mhm.
gritty than that.
He makes Bodhi almost lose his mind.
Mhm. I agree to an extent. I think everything we get with Saw in Bad Batch and Rebels and what was the other thing that he was in? Clone Wars. There's one more thing that I wanted to say. Andor. My God. That all describes Saw very well, like what you're saying, but I think this is another victim of the rewrites and unclear direction from the beginning, because like he's introduced and killed very quickly. He could have very well gone with them to Edu or even Yavin, and it would have been fine plot and structure wise.
I'm glad he's not with them though. That's
Yeah.
like that weird friend or weird like. It's
you
like
think
your
that's why you
friend's
think
cousin.
someone came in towards the end of production and was like, I actually don't like this character. Let's
I
just
don't
kill
know.
him then.
I can't tell how much was Tony Gilroy versus Gareth Edwards, but like to me, I don't know. Maybe I'm blinded to it, but to me, it's really well hidden. I think the movie flows really naturally, and I think that like Saw Gerrera plays a perfect part of raising the context of raising Jin, and he's not the important part. It's his
Raising Jin, new sitcom.
Raising Jin, new sitcom, yeah, with Saw Gerrera and young Jin Erso. No, it's what he's like, taught Jin, so we are, I don't know, through her understanding him a bit more. So he's just kind of like the plot device a little bit. I don't think he's really necessarily, and so
In Rogue One, I agree he is kind of a plot device. But
Yeah, that's
having
what I
seen all this, having seen Andor and the animation that he's in, I liked Saw Gerrera a lot more on this rewatch. Like that moment when he says, "Did they send you here to kill me?"
Mhm.
Like I was joking about Forrest Whitaker, but that's great acting for one, and it's also like super tragic that he's so paranoid for another, but also like it's not outside the realm of possibility that they would have done that, and it would have been really sad.
Yeah.
I love that scene,
And it doesn't bother me at all that he just dies right there because I think a lot of people
even
do
though
say
it
that.
was unforced. It's almost as unforced as Padme's death.
No, because it's like when you start to think about it, like this guy has a cane, he's missing a leg, he's missing an arm, he needs
Yeah.
this asthma inhaler to breathe. Like this guy has been through hell, and like he's clearly at the last stage of his life. Like there's not much more fight to give, and it comes across in the performance and the wheezing. I think it's
That's fair. And again,
beautiful.
that's assisted with all the other Saw content that we get, because you get to see that journey of how he loses all of
Yeah.
his humanity, so to speak,
Mhm.
literally, like the physically losing your legs and lungs and stuff. So yeah, I agree, but still, when I rewatch it this time and Jin says, "Come with us," and he says no, I'm just like, but why? But I agree with what you're saying.
the
So
captain goes down with his ship, man.
Yeah, that's exactly my thought too.
I don't know. I like it.
I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Sway.
Oh, I was just gonna add that I think that everyone felt the way that this fight has ground everyone down, like morally and physically. I think that was such a beautiful culmination of this is the hardest guy, um, obviously very paranoid, but clearly willing to do whatever it takes to get information, doesn't really care about the people around him. To see even him get swallowed by this war and this machine, I think was really powerful to me as somebody who had just kind of jumped into this moment.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because like, if that's gonna happen to him, what's gonna happen to anybody? Especially like a
Yeah.
fresh new face that comes into the I mean, Jin is a little more hardened, but like even Bodhi, which Bodhi
Mhm.
also has, not to jump too at Luke, not to.
And I think if you pull up any other review of Rogue One, Matt will talk about Bodhi 100 times more.
I will. One of my favorite action figures I have. But I think not to jump too far ahead, because I want to know what you think about the deaths and stuff though too. But to me, Bodhi's got the worst death, like because they all kind of face death head on, but Bodhi is not. He almost accidentally dies. Like
That's true.
He's the only one who doesn't really see it coming.
Yes,
He
and
died as he
that's-
lived.
and that's oh my god.
Kind of just along for the ride, never really knowing what's going on.
I also like Riz Ahmed quite a bit too.
His performance, I know I'm joking about Bodhi, but Riz Ahmed did do a lot more with Bodhi than Bodhi warranted.
Yes, I agree.
There's a bunch of parts where he just throws his goggles on the ground and he's like, "Yeah, Bodhi, talk to them about the communications."
He's an important character. Anyway, so wait, like, what did you think about? So I guess to the not to jump to just the ending fully, because there's a bunch more that I want to talk about and see more of your opinion. But like, did you expect every single person to die? I know I think you knew Andor died, but did you expect?
You knew Andor died?
Yes, but for some reason, the way it had been described, I thought Andor died like within the first 10 minutes of Rogue One before I
Oh,
watched it.
interesting.
So I was very surprised that he just kept trucking. Yeah.
Oh, that must have been such a stressful watch for someone that's in
It was
such
so
peril for the whole time, and you think he's gonna die every time. It's the opposite of plot
Every
armor. What's that even called?
Every moment I thought he was going to die until the very end, and I was like, "Oh, here it comes." But I agree. There was so much death in this story, and so many people who mattered that just died along the way.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting it, and I think that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say that it was like coming into the rebellion in this moment where it's just been going on for so long that people are kind of disposable in service of freedom.
Yeah.
Was very shocking is a strong word, but I really wasn't expecting it. And I did think it was handled in a way that I really loved, and it made me want to continue to watch, because I was rooting for the rebellion. And again, not to jump to the end, but even when Darth Vader comes out and you're like, was this all for nothing? Will this information even get out?
Oh my god, you
was
didn't know
so-
that? Yeah.
Oh,
That's-
yeah.
We knew that the information gets out, but yeah, that's a stressful
there's
part
a
too.
little bit of a spoiler, Sways, that the way Rogue One ends is exactly when A New Hope starts. That's like one of the first
Oh,
the first shot of Star Wars is that ship that they end up getting on when Darth Vader's watching them. Spoiler, he catches up to them, but that is the intro to A New Hope.
It was very hard not to say that
Matt-
earlier when you were talking about the timeline. I was like, this movie takes up right where it lets off. You can go straight into it.
I think Matt made a list for me of like what order I should watch everything in, and I
Mhm.
should refer back to that list, because I feel like was A New Hope the next film.
Yeah, there's like 2 lists technically. It's like the order of things and the way I would watch them as well, which would be different.
And then what Sway's doing, which I'm sure it would be nobody's order.
Yeah,
Which
this
is why it's so
explicitly
interesting.
recommended against. I bet.
This is in 100 years, there's going to be known as like the Sway way, and it's going to be watching Star Wars and Mandalorian, Andor, Rogue One.
Original trilogy. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, man, it was how about the
You have to talk to us between each one to really appreciate it.
and you're going to the dark side, and we're talking about death and stuff. The villains, I think Krennic is great here as well. Krennic, I think, is one of the
Love Krennic. I had
He's a
my
great
note
villain.
that
Yeah.
Krennic is just a better Tarkin.
yeah,
But
he
it
is.
goes back to what I was
Yeah.
saying, that Rogue One is just a better A New Hope.
Mhm.
Krennic is a strict improvement on everything they wanted Tarkin to be.
Yeah, and then Darth Vader too. We get to see him in his tank as well, which is great.
Yep, they did
he's
everything with Darth Vader that they wanted to do in A New Hope. They did
Yeah.
it better in Rogue One.
It's
And this
true.
was your first ever experience with Darth Vader. So obviously, just from pop culture, you know who Darth Vader is. But what were your thoughts? Because that last scene, the hallway scene with Darth Vader when he ignites that red blade and you hear the breathing, that is like by far every fanboy's favorite scene in Star Wars.
Yeah, it's
Everyone
great.
talks about that scene 8 years later. It is iconic. What did you think?
It was terrifying. Like the amount of stress I had about whether or not they were going to get this information out. Was this all for nothing? Did all of these people die for nothing? And then they're in this black hallway, and I sort of had a sense that Darth Vader was coming, but the way that the lightsaber, what is it? What is clicks on is what I want to say, but how would you describe
yeah.
that?
I don't know
That's
if there's
perfect.
an in-universe onomatopoeia for that. Whooshes.
Whooshes.
Whooshes, and then he appears was genuinely really terrifying because I was so nervous. Like at this point, I know that everybody I was rooting for is gone, and the only thing that's left is their contribution to the world.
Yeah.
And I was so afraid that they were going to lose even that. And having Darth Vader appear and knowing that eh, there was very little chance that they were going to get out of this was really scary for me. Was also cool as hell. I gotta say, like, I was like, oh, this is how you make an iconic character with such a great entrance. But I did really understand the fear of that character and the fear of that villain in that moment in a way that I don't think I fully understood from like the parodies of Darth Vader I've seen on SNL or whatever.
Did you feel like you understood the combat though? I don't know how to ask this question, but this is your first experience watching a Force user use a lightsaber. Like, were you like,
they're in Mandalorian.
Yes,
Were they?
exactly.
You saw Ahsoka
In
in Mandalorian.
Mandalorian.
oh,
Yeah.
Ahsoka? That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've had
Yeah.
some experience. But okay, never
I
mind.
keep talking about Rogue One just being a better A New Hope, so I'm really kind of
I guess Luke
yucking your yum
Skywalker's
for
in
when you
Mando,
watch
so.
A New Hope. But imagine that scene where Darth Vader walks in, but instead of doing anything, a couple of stormtroopers kill everyone, and then Darth Vader walks in and puts his hands on his hips and just looks around. Because that's what A New Hope is.
That's kind of true. You are gonna be in
It is
it's gonna
such
be
a
a rude
downgrade.
awakening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
when you watch the original trilogy, which
Your takeaway is going to be this was definitely 1977.
yeah, but it's very good still. I'm so interested in seeing your opinions on all of these. Man, I so badly want to watch a Star Wars movie with you. Come back to Ohio sometime, or I'll come out to LA and we have to watch a Star Wars movie together because I want to be. I also hate sitting with people and like have reactions to things. But that's the thing about Star Wars. I'll be so wrapped up in it anyway. So
Mhm.
no pressure.
No, I actually would have loved to watch this movie with people who were more familiar because I there were moments where I was like, I wonder if this means anything. And seeing somebody's reaction who understands sort of the context, I
Yeah.
think it, but I will say that even without context, that Darth Vader moment, the Hammerhead ship,
The Hammerhead
Um,
Corvette. Yeah.
there were some very obvious moments where it's like, I have no context for this at all, but I knew if I'd seen this in a movie theater, it would have been the biggest thing.
Yeah,
every
you would have oohs and ahs and stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of where to go to next because I don't want to keep you on for too long too. I have no idea how long we've been rolling for now. But like do we have just like overall thoughts? Or like I don't know. For me, this movie like it does a really good job of moving really fastly, like we said, but also introducing new planets and set pieces. Like, I guess another I want to go to is Galen Erso himself. I think that is a really interesting idea, is to have this guy get ripped out of his home to go and forcefully work for the Empire, and then create a failsafe basically for the Death Star to be blown up. Because this whole movie, again, spoiler, is because in A New Hope they blow up the Death Star, and so this is like a small little plot because they talk about getting the plans to the Death Star. So the whole movie, it rides at the very end of this, and so
Yeah.
this specific movie itself, and so it's a small plot hole, not even a plot hole, but they just expand on this small little thing, and I feel like creating this backstory with Galen Erso is super interesting, and having him die an hour into the movie, I think, is great too. Because there's not really a redemption. You know he's not going to get a redemption, and it weirdly sets the tone for the rest of the characters an hour in, and you don't even know it yet. That was more of a statement, I guess.
I actually had a question for you guys, which is where I was talking about the fatherhood of it all.
Oh, yes.
But knowing you guys are, having children coming into the world right now, I found the line, "Look at you, I have so much to tell you," so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the relationship of this dad making a decision like that and just kind of needing to live with it was, as someone who's not a father, like very resonant. And I wondered if I don't know how recently you guys have all watched Rogue One, but I was wondering if that relationship had any different resonance for you.
Yeah. I don't know when this episode's coming out, but in May we're talking or have talked a lot about The Phantom Menace, and that was my first time rewatching that's episode 1, and it was my first time rewatching that since becoming a father. And there's certain scenes in that also where it's just scenes I never really thought about before having kids, and now after it, it's just like, actually, this is devastating. Like, it seems so innocuous 2 years ago, and now it's awful. I had more of a reaction this time to Lyra saying goodbye to Jin, her mom. But that's also another example of what I thought was a question mark editing decision or rewrite kind of thing, when she puts the Kyber necklace around Jin and says trust in the Force. It's like, was that supposed to be a bigger thing, the Force or that Kyber necklace? Because then Chirrut says when they meet, the strongest stars have hearts of Kyber, which is like a nice fortune cookie, but what are we talking about here, Chirrut?
I wonder if there was an original version where she uses the Force at the very end. And then when
yeah.
Tony Gilroy came in, he was like, I don't think people are going to like that.
Well,
Is Tony Gilroy just the best editor? I'm starting to think that, what's the other guy's name?
Gareth Edwards.
Gareth Edwards had
Maybe
just
it's
like
not
these
even-
massive plans, and Tony was just the guy to be like, hey, we got to just reel this back a little bit.
I've also heard they brought in Dave Filoni to do a lot of the final editing and rewriting too.
Seriously? I did not hear that.
It was an interview with Freddie Prinze Jr. and he talks about how they brought in Dave Filoni, and that's why Dave Filoni brought in like the call of General Syndulla and the Ghost in that final battle.
Freddie Prinze Jr. voices a character in Rebels, by the way, Sway, because Freddie Prinze Jr. is the most random. Like, he's like Shaggy from Scooby Doo.
She wasn't about to ask a single fucking question about that. She was like, okay, Freddie likes it.
No, I was very confused. I was like, what?
Naming people.
Helpful context.
I don't think it would have been like Jin using the Force or something, but like maybe the Kyber necklace was like a key to open something in the Imperial Vault. Or something like that. It just felt like a dangling thread at the end of my rewatch this time.
Also, speaking of editing, this movie is like 2:15 or
Yeah.
something like that, which I texted our mutual friend Matt Grippy and said, this is like the length of an indie drama today. Like the fact that they just compressed that into 2 hours and 15 minutes or 17 minutes or whatever it was pretty incredible.
It's got the same runtime of like any Judd Apatow comedy movie now too.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the same amount of length as Trainwreck or something.
Yeah.
Or The Bubble on Netflix.
I feel like such a boomer. Movies are getting too long these days.
But
They
it's
are
true though.
getting too
This
long.
was such a good runtime, and
I
it is
have
perfect.
to pee earlier now. Hollywood.
So true.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like Rogue One is just like the gold standard for how what Star Wars should look at when they make stuff in the future, because I love Return of the Jedi, I love The Last Jedi, but I feel like everything about this, from like what we were talking about, the humor earlier, the combination of humor to heart in the film is perfect. And maybe it's because we've seen a lot of bad Marvel movies post 2016 that really lean way too heavily into the humor, and it just like takes away so much from it. But this was like the perfect combination. I don't know why I'm going back to that all of a sudden. It was
No,
on my
because
mind.
I agree. I think it's great. And Sway, what did you do you have any other notes that you want to talk about as well, or like general things or questions or anything overarching?
You mentioned one thing, Matt, which is the locations.
Mhm.
I will say my shock at seeing a tropical island essentially
Yeah.
in a science fiction movie and also in a Star Wars movie. I didn't expect that location. And I thought it was really interesting, but it just made me realize uh, how the same locations are just kind of being reused over and over again in sci-fi, and we're
Mm.
not getting in new locations like that. So
Yeah.
I found that really surprising, but in a way that I made me think like I wish science fiction would explore new locations
That's a
for
great call.
sets.
We talk a lot on this podcast about creature designs in Star Wars, because there's a lot of
Mhm.
aliens and there's a lot of really good ones in Rogue One. But we don't talk enough about locations, because that is very true. How Luke always says, like, oh, you should just like make this person an alien. Like, you can try a little bit harder with the creature design here and there. Same is true for the locations. We do see a lot that's just like, okay, this is kind of like a different place in our world, right? Whereas I feel like
Yeah.
we occasionally get glimpses of these otherworldly locations. I'm trying to think of one that Sway might have seen. I guess it probably would have had to have been a Mandalorian, but I can't think of any. So I'm just gonna think of like Mustafar. Like, Mustafar is not something. It's a lava planet, right? It's not something that would exist anywhere on Earth, but it's really cool to see it in this galaxy.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like in a lesser version of this movie, they would have made like Edu, for instance, is not that unique of a planet, but they could have done a lot less. Like, sharp
Mhm.
mountains and it's night and raining, which I guess happens everywhere, but it helps
cool,
the
though.
atmosphere.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, it was cool.
within this context of the movie, it's cool because you have that bright, sunny beach. You have that really dark, you have the dark, rainy, the sharp mountain, mountainous, of Edu. So you have all these different locations, I think, and like Jeddah is so different. And I think when this movie was first coming out, my brother was like, "Oh, I heard Rogue One is what puts the word wars in Star Wars," and it's so true. Like the thing on Jeddah, really, the fight when that breaks out, I think it really shows you a different side of Star Wars, and I think this movie really has a lot. Again, going back to the comedy, to the action, to everything. I mean, this movie is great, and even the creature design. Like, you have that small little creature shooting the like machine gun everywhere. Like, it's just fun.
Yes.
This movie is fun to look at.
That was another example. I feel like I'm listing a lot of negatives, but I do love this movie. But
Mhm.
like the balance between the action and the comedy and the heart is very good. But there's two specific instances where I think it takes it too far into like terror and horror. And the first one is Bor Gullet when
Mhm.
he interrogates Bodhi.
Oh, I love
And
that scene. It's freaky.
I love it too. It's too freaky.
Yeah.
And like it reminds me of the Dianoga scene in A New Hope, where it's like, yeah, there's a creepy monster and it's
Yeah.
like in the water with you. But then it's like, oh, Han says, well, one thing's for sure, we're all gonna be a lot thinner. And you're taking the piss out of it, you're making a joke about it. But then the Bor Gullet scene ends with Saw saying like, oh, you're gonna lose your mind. And it's like, oh my god. And then next thing, K2SO's like, oh, there's a problem on the horizon. There's no horizon. It's like,
no,
let's be a little bit more gradual with our tonal shifts. And the other example is again on Jeddah when that fight breaks out,
Mhm.
and it just pans to that small Asian girl screaming who lost her parents.
Oh yeah.
Like maybe it's also just being a dad, but I was like, oh my god, this isn't fun battle. This is
Can we
now
follow up
sad
with her in
battle.
20 years? Because her life just changed drastically.
Yeah, well, it feels like in a war movie, like an EMP goes off or something. It's like that is the
Yeah.
reality of war, I think. So I think that's
Yeah, but the reality of war balanced with the fun wackiness of Star Wars, they tried very hard to balance it a lot more in this movie than they ever have before or since.
Mhm.
And I think it works a lot of the time, but it didn't that time for me.
That's interesting. The thing that stuck out to me on rewatch specifically about the Bor Gullet scene was just how good Borgullet looked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'cause
Like
Mhm.
that was,
Yeah.
I'm assuming it was all CG, but it was great CG. And I'm like
I don't
looking at
know.
him, and I
thought
was
it
like,
I think it
is
might
it
be
a puppet?
It looks like a puppet a lot of the time.
The way it
'Cause-
interacts with Bodhi looks
Yeah.
Maybe it's a
too good,
combination
yeah.
because
that
I'm
could have
looking
been
at
puppets,
it.
just little tentacle things.
I just kept
slapping his
wondering,
face.
why does this look so good? Like, why do other
Yeah.
things that have come out since then do not look this good? Like, there's a lot of bad puppeteering in Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Like, even in the big movies, like
Yeah.
the Rise of Skywalker, the locals on Pisana like look obviously puppeted. The big snake in the sand pit or
Yeah.
whatever in the Rise of Skywalker, it doesn't. I mean, I think that's CG. They had like a giant practical snake that they then completely replaced, but neither of them look great. And this
It's-
one, like, I'm like, why does this look so good?
Because I think the setting, it's dark, it's weird. You're able to use shadows to your advantage. You know, I think it's able to play it off perfectly, and I think that's a sign of a good director as well, though, a good director of photography. You know, I think this movie looks great in
Someone
every
who
single
kind of-
scene.
they're able to see the full process and know in pre like how they should shoot it to give them the best
That's
shot.
what I would say. Yeah.
Mhm.
I would
That's
also say
interesting.
that the filmic quality that you've mentioned, Matt,
Mhm.
where there's a bit of grain, like there are real set pieces.
Yeah.
I think what has happened a lot recently is everything has started to look so digital and
Very
Yeah.
shiny.
yes, exactly. That it loses the ability to hide some of those seams, like you're saying, Matt. And
Yeah.
I think that having some of that helps to make everything feel more real.
Have not Rogue One talk, but have you seen the trailer for the Acolyte, the new Star Wars show?
Yes.
Because that's all practical as well. They didn't use
Yes.
the volume for
Oh,
that.
really?
Yeah, for that show. So I feel like that's gonna be another one that looks. I feel like they're almost fraying away from it now a little bit.
I agree. Yeah.
Which I'm, well, I'm okay with either one honestly, but I'm like, oh, I'm looking forward to looking at this show more than like pausing Mandalorian. I'm like, no, okay, that looks. I'm glad we saw Mandalorian, but I want that depth to that. Anyway, Max, do you have any other questions for Sway as well? Because I feel like you had a load of questions in general.
Ooh, yeah. Let me think. I think we got to them all. No, it's a very interesting perspective. On my rewatch, all I was thinking was like, I wonder what Sway thinks of this scene right now, like with no other context.
That's how I feel about my entire life. I always ask myself that with everything. I was like, what is Sway
I know. I
thinking?
get dressed in the morning and I'm like,
What's-
should I text her?
That's really funny. It is true. I always do like rewatching something though, thinking of what the other person would think during that viewing or so. Because like overall thoughts, I guess. Sway, like, what would you give this movie out of 10? I'm a big person with ranking things. Like, it's hard to rank shows and movies simultaneously, but would you put this above Andor and Mando? Would you put it below? Where would you rank it? I guess in general.
I would put it above Mando for sure.
Mhm.
It's hard for me to put a movie above a series just because I've spent so much time with the series.
Absolutely, yeah.
But what I will say is from a movie perspective, and it's also hard for me to rank because I haven't seen any other Star
That's
Wars,
true.
which is ridiculous. But I will say that when I watched this film, my immediate thoughts were, I wish I had seen this in a theater when it came out. Like, it's
Yeah.
such an incredible, like the energy that it sustains, the feelings of connection I had to the characters, the way that they talked about hope and the Force and how people developed hope through the Force and kind of co-opting the Force even if they didn't actually have access to it to try to keep hope alive in this very terrible situation. Even the darkness that we're talking about around people being in a war situation and people being taken from you at any moment, your
Yeah.
life being in peril at every moment. It really felt like a ride in a way that I wasn't expecting from watching something again on a projector at home, but at home. And it made me wish that I had been part of a big theatrical experience where people were all seeing it
Yeah.
for the first time.
Well, I don't know if you saw, but Phantom Menace for the 25-year anniversary is coming to theaters, so you can always see a Star Wars movie in
That'll be my
theaters.
next movie.
That in May. Yep.
Oh, you're gonna love it.
Yeah, it's one of the spoiler. I won't say anything. I won't say anything. But
I agree, though. Watching it in theaters was amazing, and now just comparing it back to this, rewatched it on my phone on the toilet in between wipes. It's just not the same.
That's how you watch. What?
It's hard to find time these days to watch movies.
Oh my God, Luke. That's.
But I will say it made me understand your love for this story. Like it made me
Yeah.
understand how I know you guys all saw this together when it first came out. I just saw Dune recently, which I saw twice, and
Yeah.
it was something that like I described as like going on a trip, like an experience.
Yeah.
And I had that same feeling with Star Wars, and it made me understand how your love for this story. Like I just got it. I just connected as I
Validation.
was watching it.
Finally. Now, can you just say that, but just say my name like you're my dad and my mom? I'm just kidding. My parents are very supportive. Just a joke. Just a joke.
But it did make me, as soon as it finished, I was like, "Ah, I gotta watch the next movie. It just like
Yeah.
you get so invested, and it has such a particular feel. And I will say I didn't necessarily feel that way after finishing Mandalorian or Andor, where I was like, I have to seek out every other Star Wars
Yeah.
film or show that's come out and watch it. And I did have that experience with Rogue One, though I understand from what you guys are talking about that there were some issues with the story that were politics and changing hands of the
Yeah.
people working on it. I think the overall spirit of Star Wars, I don't know if you guys feel that way. Does that kind of come through in this film?
Yeah, I mean, I think this again. This is every time I watch them, I love this one. And like when the newer movies, they rank lower for me in comparison to the older ones, but like this one just stands above the rest for me. Specifically like my top three are A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and then Rogue One. That's a tough list to really crack too. So I mean, yeah, I wanna rewatch everything after I watch Rogue One. It just lingers.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Yeah, I agree with you about the. I forget how you were saying it exactly. But it like hits every theme of Star Wars.
Yeah.
At the same time, and I was saying before, sometimes it does it more McClunky than others, but it hits the humor and the war, and then at the end the heart, and then it ends on a moment of hope above in the face of overwhelming odds, and
Yes.
that's hard to do so many times in a row.
Yes.
To do it at the end of every single Star Wars movie, but damn, they do it.
My God, they do.
Luke and I hold pretty similar views on A New Hope, which is that it's obviously a classic, but it is definitely a product of its time, and sometimes that kind of deters me from watching it sometimes, but Rogue One definitely helps motivate you to rewatch Star Wars.
Yes.
Because after it, like Matt said earlier, it goes directly from Rogue One into the events of A New Hope, and it definitely motivates you to rewatch
I
it.
really want to see your opinion, Sway, when you watch the original trilogy, because I've always been a weird combination, I think, between nerd and like film fan. And so like, we both talk about like Jean-Luc Godard movies and like Kurosawa and stuff. And so we have that aspect of we like old movies, that black and white foreign language films. And so I'd be very interested in seeing what you think of the original Star Wars films, because they do run a bit slower, obviously, and like Luke said, Darth Vader comes in, puts his hands on his hips, and kind of commands the room a little bit, which is very different from the Vader we see in Rogue One. But I'd be so interested in seeing what your perspective is from like also a film fan, but also a sci-fi fan, perspective, and now dabbling within the Star Wars universe too. I think you have a really interesting like combination of those three things, and I'm very excited for you to watch them eventually.
I'm really excited to see how action sci-fi evolved across the course of these films. I
Yeah.
just think that it has such a long legacy in that genre, and I think exactly to what you're speaking to, the way that it's changed over the years is, I'm sure, very much influenced by Star Wars. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited to watch this. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective.
Yeah. because I know, like I said, Max and Luke both are like, yeah, it's kind of old, but I'm like, well, no, it's old, it's good. It's like one of my favorite movies is Duck Soup. You know, Marx Brothers are so funny. That movie came out in 1932. So, anyway, does anybody else any top overall notes or anything or thoughts? Max's camera is at like 10% as well. Not that we have to rush, but there's a charger right there if you want to plug it in, Max. It's really starting to freak me out, man.
My notes I can save for some other time. We really blew past not blew past in a bad way, but it's really into the weeds. And I'm good. The one guy, the cool alien looking guy, I forget the exact species name.
Benthic.
His name's
Probably.
Ben
Oh no,
Thick?
that's Two Tubes. But I had
Two
another note
Tubes.
about Two Tubes. There are two.
There
Two
are. I
Tubes.
noticed that on rewatch too.
What's the other one doing
Yeah,
there?
the prop guys made a second, and they were like, "Well, can we just throw this one in too? We worked really hard on it."
That was odd. I'm glad you saw that too. But no, the small guy that was played by Warwick Davis, I'm sure. When the AT-AT shows up, he shouts out Karabast at, which for one, is it canon or not that they call it at or AT-AT?
Oh, jeez.
I don't think this confirms it one way or the other because he's an alien and might have a dialect or a different accent. But he also said Karabast, and I didn't know anyone says that but Zeb.
I also
And I
feel
didn't
like
notice it until I watched this with subtitles
it's
this
gotta
time.
be a cultural thing, right? Like, Sway, what do you call the spot between after your sidewalk where you put like your garbage cans, like that patch of grass between your yard and like what would you call that?
Oh, what would you call? What do you call it?
We call it a tree lawn. Us
Oh, a
Clevelanders,
tree lawn.
right? You
What do
guys?
Yeah.
Do you not call it a tree lawn? Is
No,
that a
no
weird
one-
phrase
no.
to you?
That's a Cleveland thing. No
That's
one else.
a new phrase to me.
No one
Yeah,
else in the country calls it a tree lawn. Isn't that weird?
Exclusively Cleveland or Midwest?
I'm pretty sure just Cleveland. People in Columbus don't know what that is.
That's interesting.
Really?
I've never
Yeah.
heard this before.
So anyway, an at or an AT-AT, very viable. If we can do from Cleveland to Columbus, let alone a whole galaxy, that's all I'm saying.
All right, but that's all my notes. Thank you for coming back to that. It sucks that Tarkin snakes out the Death Star from Krennic. I'm reading, obviously. But did Krennic think that Bodhi acted alone? Yeah, because that scene where Tarkin is like, oh, did you think he acted alone? It came from the installation on Edu, Galen Erso's facility. And then Krennic goes to Edu. But it's like, come on, Krennic. Were you just going to let this lead drop right there? Like, you're really not staking your reputation well in order to keep command of the Death Star here.
He saw the goggles and was like, "That guy could do this all by himself. He needs nothing. He needs no help." Absolutely.
I will say the politicking, like the kind of corporate politicking that
yeah.
you're talking about, I did find really interesting part of the story because it is so much a part of Andor that I found it to be a little less strategic.
Yeah, it's like welcomed almost to see that side of things.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it is.
That War Council scene too, when Jyn gives her speech. That's one of the better Star
That's
Wars
great.
scenes.
Yes.
That's all my notes. Thank you.
Amazing. Maxwell, do you have anything?
No other notes on Rogue One, but I do have a force for thought that I thought of while
right.
we were talking.
Well, let's give it 1 second. So wait, do you have anything else to say as well before we launch into this
Just that
force?
it's nice to talk to you and see you guys.
It's super nice to see and talk to
I
you as well.
agree.
We text a lot, but it's very nice to actually see you and talk to
Yes.
you. Even though I'm looking down at you, you're here, but I'm looking at you there. So it's very odd. So this entire time, if no one's been looking at you, we are looking at you. But I'm so glad you watched Rogue One. We finally got to do this. I'm excited for you potentially to watch Phantom Menace in theaters. I will have a new baby by a couple days, potentially a week. So I probably won't see it in theaters. With that being said, they also are showing a sneak preview, a new trailer, I believe, in front of it of the Acolyte. So also,
No way.
Yep, they just announced
Oh.
it today.
Hot damn.
And so that'll be fun too. But yeah, I'm so excited for you to watch Star Wars, and hopefully every time you watch a Star Wars movie, we can have you back on the podcast and talk about it.
I am rewatching Rogue One in theaters in May. I don't
Oh.
think I mentioned
Oh.
that.
Amazing. Well, let's just scrap this episode and do it then. Can you imagine
But
a
maybe
little
I'll send
follow-up?
you. Maybe I'll just send you like a voice note of my experience
Oh,
from the
yes.
theater.
Actually, you
Yeah.
should send a voice so then I can have a force for thought and be like, oh, this actually comes from Sway, and you can do it. All right, spoiler for a couple episodes from an episode in the future. Anyway, does everybody have any force for thought?
I do have a force for thought. Yes, when we were talking about Vader's entrance and he activates his red lightsaber, it is clearly a slower activation than we've seen other lightsabers activate,
Sure.
which makes me wonder, is that a setting? There's a lot
Oh.
of dials on these lightsabers. Do you think they can like tweak that to be like, oh, I want this thing to come in hot because I'm about to be in danger? Like, do you
Or-
think Vader was
yeah.
like in the darkness, like kind of turning that down? So he's like, I'm going to scare the shit out of these people.
How does that work with canon such that the filmmaker could have chosen to shoot that scene in slow motion?
You think we might have just watched it in slow motion?
Mm.
That's interesting because
But,
there's
but, I mean, I don't think so either, but canonically, it's possible.
it is because I believe this is canon. The novelization for Phantom Menace, when it talks about Obi-Wan killing Darth Maul, he jumps out of the pit, does a flip over Darth Maul and slices him in half. We see it in real time in the film, but
See,
according to
doesn't
the
that sound badass? Sway?
novelization,
You're gonna love that movie.
but according to the novelization, he used the Force to like force speed all of that, and that's why Maul didn't catch him in time. Like it was like in the blink of an eye, he did that.
Huh.
Interesting.
I
So
will
maybe we
say
do see things
I-
differently than it's actually occurring.
Well, I do drive a Toyota Corolla, and there's an eco setting and a sports setting. So maybe he had his eco setting on.
That's true.
Maybe it's,
That's
yeah,
a great
that makes
call,
more
Sway.
sense. It's not
Yeah.
a dial, it's just a switch.
Yeah. All terrain mode, you know, he's got the different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of Kyber to turn it on quickly, so that's the eco mode.
Yeah,
He's like,
no,
I
he's-
gotta save
yeah.
Kyber.
He's got to
to
control it with the Force because you can't risk your lightsaber being in eco mode and you have to turn it on in a hurry and you like miss a blaster deflection because
Yeah.
it's igniting still.
No, that's user error. I think that in order to be a Jedi, you have to be quick.
You're like shaking it as it's coming out, like fuck.
Go, go,
come
go,
on,
go, go. That'd be really funny. Like when you were a kid and the lightsaber gets stuck halfway through.
Yep.
Just actually. So canonically, that does happen as well if the toys are taken into account.
The stars are just like us.
The stars are just like us. All right. Well, anyway. Do you want to do the sign off, Max? You're better at that than I am.
Yeah, so let us know what you think. Let us know what your thoughts are on Rogue One. Let us know what you think about lightsaber activations. And let us know if you want to see Sway come back in another year from now to do A New Hope with us, because I am dying to find out, especially now that I'm hearing that Sway might go see Phantom Menace. This order is just absolutely absurd.
The Sway Way.
That you're
Sway
going from
way.
Rogue
I'll
One
make the graphic. The Sway
straight
Way.
to Phantom Menace. I think that is crazy. So very excited to continue getting these updates on where you are in your Star Wars journey.
Thank you. Very excited to share them.
Thanks for joining us, Sway.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Sway,
for
where
having
can
me.
people find you at?
In Los Angeles? Is that a great answer?
You hear that? Get 'em, boys.
On Instagram is Sway Benz. Is that a
Okay,
better answer?
yeah, I didn't know if you wanted us to promote you.
If you don't
I
wanna-
guess
if
I
you don't
should have
wanna
asked
plug
that
anything, we
first.
can
You're
cut
not
it.
plugging anything.
Yeah.
We're just gonna
We'll find you.
we're just gonna dox you. It's all right. All right.
I don't run like a lemonade stand or anything that I would people to
She's just a
Find-
person, Max. You don't have to monetize
She's our
everything.
friend.
I don't know. I post interesting things on Instagram. People can find me.
That's true. People can find you. And in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah. Maxter Jedi on Twitter as
That's
well,
true.
if anyone wants to look me up there.
You should change your name on Instagram to Maxter Jedi too. I think I always read your username as Maxed.
Because it's Max T1210.
Yep.
That's where you can find me on Instagram. But if you want to just find the Force for Thought podcast, you can find us across social media at Force for Thought, or you can email us at forceforthought@gmail.com.
True.
And if you're in LA, look out for Sway.
Oh my god. Cut it.
See you, Sammy.
I'll handle the sign off next week.